In part one, we told the story of Pepsi, the company that went bankrupt twice, got rejected by Coca-Cola 3 times, and still clawed its way to a $94 billion empire through spite, cheap bottles, a vodka barter deal with the Soviet Union, and a blind taste test that broke its rival's brain. But that was the challenger's version. Now let's hear from the empire. Because Coca-Cola didn't become the most recognized brand in human history by playing defense. They built something so vast, so deeply embedded in global culture, that even when they made the worst product decision of the 20th century, it barely slowed them down. And their story starts the same way Pepsi's does. In a pharmacy, in a southern town, with a man trying to solve a medical problem. Except this man wasn't fixing stomach aches. He was trying to escape morphine. John Pemberton was a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. In April 1865, at the Battle of Columbus, he took a saber wound to the chest. The doctors gave him morphine for the pain. The wound healed. The addiction didn't. For the next 20 years, Pemberton was hooked and desperate to find something, anything, that could replace the drug. He was also a pharmacist. And in the 1860s and 1870s, pharmacists were essentially drug designers. There was no FDA, no regulation, no testing requirements. If you could mix something that made people feel good, you could sell it. So Pemberton experimented. In 1866, he created a drink called French wine coca, an alcoholic concoction laced with coca leaf extract, which is the plant that cocaine comes from. He also added cola nut for caffeine. The drink was marketed as a nerve tonic, a brain stimulant, and, with absolutely no sense of irony, a cure for morphine addiction. He was essentially replacing one addiction with 2 others, alcohol and cocaine. French wine coca sold well in Atlanta. But then, in 1886, the city passed a local prohibition law banning alcohol sales. Pemberton was forced to reformulate overnight. He stripped out the wine, kept the coca leaf, kept the cola nut, added sugar and carbonated water, and handed the result to his bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, who named it Coca-Cola, combining the 2 active ingredients, and wrote the name in the flowing cursive script that is still the company's logo today. On May 8, 1886, the first glass of Coca-Cola was served at Jacob's Pharmacy in downtown Atlanta. 5 cents a glass. It was marketed as a brain tonic and intellectual beverage, which, given that it contained cocaine and caffeine, was technically accurate, if you squint. Now let's address the question everyone asks. Did Coca-Cola really have cocaine in it? Yes, about 9 milligrams per glass. That's not a myth, not an urban legend, not some internet conspiracy. 9 milligrams of actual cocaine in every serving. Pemberton used 5 ounces of coca leaves per gallon of syrup. By the early 1900s, as public concern about cocaine grew, the company started reducing the amount. Candler's reformulation cut it to about 1/10 of the original. In 1903, they switched to spent coca leaves, leaves that had already been processed to extract the cocaine. By 1929, the formula was completely cocaine-free. But here's a detail that surprises almost everyone. To this day, Coca-Cola still uses coca leaf extract in its formula. A company called Stepan, based in New Jersey, is the only facility in the United States with a DEA license to import and process coca leaves, about 100 tons a year from Peru. They strip out the cocaine, which goes to a pharmaceutical company for medical use, and the remaining flavorless extract goes to Coca-Cola. The most famous brand in history still technically contains a trace of its most controversial ingredient. Pemberton never saw any of this. He died on August 16, 1888, just 2 years after inventing the drink, from stomach cancer. He was 57. He was broke. The man who created the most valuable consumer brand in human history didn't even have enough money for his own funeral. Remember Caleb Bradham, the Pepsi guy from part 1? Same story. Eerily, almost identically the same story. Both men were pharmacists. Both created iconic drinks behind a drugstore counter. Both incorporated successful companies. Both lost everything. Both died broke. 2 southern towns 7 years apart. 2 of the most famous beverages in human history. And neither inventor saw a cent of the wealth they created. The people who got rich were the ones who came after. And for Coca-Cola, that person was remarkable. For Coca-Cola, that person was Asa Griggs Candler. Asa Griggs Candler was a shrewd, deeply ambitious Atlanta businessman who recognized what Pemberton never did. The formula was worth more than the pharmacy. He acquired the rights to Coca-Cola between 1888 and 1891 through a series of small transactions totaling $2,300. That's it. $2,300 for what would become the most valuable brand on earth. Adjusted for inflation, that's maybe $60,000 today. PepsiCo is worth $200 billion. The Coca-Cola company is worth $327 billion. And it all started with a deal that cost less than a used car. What Candler did with the formula was revolutionary. He didn't just sell soda, he invented modern marketing. In the 1890s, nobody was giving away free samples. Candler did. He printed thousands of coupons for a free glass of Coca-Cola and mailed them to people across the country. If a pharmacist didn't want to carry Coke, Candler gave them the first barrel of syrup for free. By 1892, sales had grown tenfold. His advertising budget hit $100,000 in 1901, an absurd amount for the time, and $1 million by 1911. But Candler's biggest innovation wasn't the marketing. It was the franchise bottling system. And this is where Coca-Cola built the logistical fortress that Pepsi spent decades trying to breach. In 1899, two lawyers from Chattanooga, Tennessee, Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead, walked into Candler's office with a proposition. They wanted the exclusive rights to bottle Coca-Cola across the entire United States. Candler didn't see the point. He believed the future of soda was the fountain, the pharmacy counter, the restaurant, the soda shop. Bottles were fragile, expensive, and hard to transport. Why bother? So he agreed to the deal and charged them $1. $1 single for the right to bottle America's most popular drink across the entire country. It's probably the single best deal anyone has ever gotten in the history of American business. And one of the worst deals Candler ever made. Thomas and Whitehead didn't bottle it all themselves. They subdivided the territory and sold sub-franchises. Local bottlers who paid for the right to make and distribute Coca-Cola in their region. By the 1950s, there were over 1,100 Coca-Cola franchise bottlers across the country. Each one invested their own money, built their own plants, hired their own trucks. Coca-Cola provided the syrup and the brand. The bottlers did everything else. This is the machine that Pepsi never had. Think about what this model means. Coca-Cola doesn't actually make Coca-Cola, not the finished product. They make the syrup and the brand. Everything else, the bottles, the trucks, the refrigerators and gas stations, the shelf space negotiations with grocery stores, all of that is done and paid for by independent franchisees. Coca-Cola's actual manufacturing cost is almost zero. They ship concentrate and collect payments. It's one of the highest margin business models ever created. While Caleb Bradham was trying to distribute syrup from a single pharmacy in North Carolina, Coca-Cola had 1,000 independent businesses all working to sell the same product, all investing their own money, all paying their own costs. It was a distribution army that cost Coca-Cola almost nothing to maintain, and once it was built, it was nearly impossible to compete against. This is why Coca-Cola, with half the revenue of PepsiCo, is worth significantly more on the stock market. The franchise model is a money machine. And then there was the bottle itself. In 1915, Coca-Cola commissioned a design so distinctive that, and this was the actual specification, you could recognize it by touch in the dark or lying broken on the ground. The Root Glass Company in Indiana won the contract. A designer named Earl Dean based the shape on an illustration of a cocoa pod he found in a library book. Not a coca leaf, a cocoa pod. That's one of the most common misconceptions about the bottle. The inspiration was chocolate, not cocaine. The contour bottle became one of the most recognizable objects in the world. It wasn't just a container. It was a brand you could feel with your eyes closed. Coca-Cola had turned a glass bottle into an icon. While Pepsi was pouring its soda into recycled beer bottles, Coke had a shape that people recognized from 50 feet away. And then there's the formula itself, or rather, the mythology around it. Coca-Cola created what's arguably the greatest marketing story of all time, the secret recipe, the most closely guarded secret in corporate America. The official line is that only 2 employees know the complete formula at any given time, and they're forbidden from traveling on the same airplane. The formula, coded as Merchandise 7X, was kept in a bank vault for decades and then moved, with great ceremony, to a theatrical vault inside the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta in 2011, where tourists line up to stare at a locked safe. Is it real? Sort of. In January 2026, a YouTuber actually reverse-engineered the formula using mass spectrometry. His conclusion: the secret amounts to natural flavoring oils, citrus, cinnamon, nutmeg, coriander, that make up less than 1% of the drink by mass. The real secret isn't what's in Coca-Cola. It's that people believe there's a secret at all. The vault, the two-man rule, the mystique, it's brand theater of the highest order. And it's worked for over a century. But the move that truly separated Coca-Cola from every other company on Earth happened during World War II. And it was orchestrated by one man, Robert Woodruff. Woodruff became president of Coca-Cola in 1923 and held the position for 32 years. His vision was simple and absolute. Coca-Cola should be available within arm's reach of desire, everywhere in the world at all times. He created the company's foreign department in 1926, and by the late 1930s, Coca-Cola had plants in 44 countries. Then the war started, and Woodruff made a promise that would change global commerce forever. In 1941, he declared that every American service member, no matter where they were stationed in the world, would get a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents. Whatever it cost the company. Think about what that meant logistically. American soldiers were fighting in North Africa, Europe, the Pacific, Southeast Asia. You can't just ship bottles across the ocean. They'd break. They'd go flat. The logistics were impossible. So Coca-Cola did something extraordinary. They built portable bottling plants and shipped them to the front lines. On June 29, 1943, a telegram arrived from General Eisenhower's headquarters in North Africa requesting 10 portable bottling plants. Within 6 months, the first one was operational in Algeria. By the end of the war, Coca-Cola had shipped 64 bottling plants overseas. 148 company employees were embedded with the military as technical observers, civilians in army uniforms with TO patches on their shoulders. The soldiers called them Coca-Cola colonels. During the war, American servicemen drank over 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola. 5 billion. Let that number sink in. It wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a piece of home. Soldiers wrote letters about it. They traded cigarettes for it. For a kid from Iowa stationed in the jungles of the Pacific, a cold bottle of Coke was the closest thing to being back in America. And here's the strategic genius of the whole operation. When the war ended, those 64 bottling plants didn't come home. They stayed. The infrastructure was already built. The supply chains were already running. The local populations, French, Italian, German, Japanese, Australian, had already tasted the product. Coca-Cola didn't need to enter international markets after the war. They were already there. The American military had built them a global distribution network, and all Coca-Cola had to do was keep the machines running. While Pepsi was still rebuilding from its second bankruptcy, still selling cheap soda in recycled beer bottles, mostly on the American East Coast, Coca-Cola was already the most distributed consumer product in human history. With manufacturing on 6 continents, local bottling partners in dozens of countries, and brand recognition that rivaled the American flag itself. That's the kind of head start you simply cannot overcome with a clever jingle and a nickel price point. By the 1950s, Coca-Cola was the most recognized brand on earth, not just in beverages, in anything. The red and white logo was as familiar as the American flag. The contour bottle could be identified by touch alone. Robert Woodruff's vision had come true. No matter where you went, Tokyo, Cairo, Buenos Aires, a gas station in rural Kansas, there was a Coca-Cola within arm's reach. And here's the Cold War contrast that makes this whole rivalry so interesting. In part 1, we told you how Pepsi penetrated the Soviet Union through that incredible vodka for soda barter deal. Coca-Cola was locked out of the entire communist world, but everywhere else, Western Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Coca-Cola was already there, had been there since the war. While Pepsi was pulling off creative stunts in Moscow, Coke was quietly selling in 135 countries. Different strategies, both brilliant. One scrappy and improvised, the other systematic and unstoppable. But then in 1975, Pepsi showed up with two white cups, and for the first time, Coca-Cola didn't know what to do. Remember the Pepsi challenge from part 1? How in blind taste tests, people consistently chose the sweeter taste of Pepsi? Well, here's what that looked like from inside Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta. Between 1975 and 1984, Coca-Cola's market share fell from over 60% to under 39%. Pepsi had signed Michael Jackson while Coke was stuck with Bill Cosby. Young people were choosing Pepsi. The blind tests kept showing the same result. For a company that had dominated for a century, this was an existential crisis. Coca-Cola's internal research confirmed what Pepsi already knew. In blind taste tests, consumers preferred a sweeter cola. So the company did what any data-driven corporation would do. They reformulated. They spent 4 years and $4 million on research. They tested the new formula on nearly 200,000 consumers. The test said yes. So on April 23, 1985, Coca-Cola CEO Roberto Goizueta held a press conference at Lincoln Center in New York and announced that after 99 years, they were changing the formula. He called it the surest move ever made. The stock actually went up that day. Pepsi's CEO, Roger Enrico, declared a company holiday. He took out full-page newspaper ads saying Pepsi had won the cola wars. It was the single worst product decision in the history of corporate America. The backlash was instant and violent. Calls to Coca-Cola's hotline jumped from 400 a day to over 8,000 at the peak. Over 40,000 phone calls and letters flooded the company in just weeks. One letter was addressed to Chief Dodo, the Coca-Cola Company. A retiree in Seattle named Gay Mullins borrowed $120,000 to start an organization called Old Cola Drinkers of America. He set up a phone hotline that received 60,000 calls before it was shut down. People weren't just angry about a soda. They were angry about an identity. Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink. It was a symbol of America, of nostalgia, of every barbecue and baseball game and family road trip. Changing the formula felt like changing the flag. 79 days, that's how long New Coke lasted. On July 11, 1985, Coca-Cola held another press conference, this time to announce the return of the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. ABC News interrupted General Hospital to report it live. People celebrated in the streets. Senator David Pryor of Arkansas called it a meaningful moment in the history of America. Don Keough, the company president, stood at the podium and said something that became one of the most honest lines in corporate history. All the time and money and skill poured into consumer research on the new Coca-Cola could not measure or reveal the deep and abiding emotional attachment to original Coca-Cola. Now here's the conspiracy theory, and it's a good one. Some people believe Coca-Cola planned the entire thing, that they deliberately launched New Coke to create a wave of nostalgia, then brought back the classic formula to a hero's welcome in a sales spike. When a reporter asked Keough if this was the case, he gave the perfect answer. We're not that dumb, and we're not that smart. There's a darker theory, though. In 1980, Coca-Cola had quietly begun replacing cane sugar with high fructose corn syrup in its American formula. It was cheaper, but it tasted slightly different. By 1984, most American Coke was already on HFCS. When Coca-Cola Classic returned after the New Coke debacle, it came back on corn syrup, not sugar. Nobody noticed. They were too busy celebrating the return of their beloved brand to realize the formula had already changed years ago. Was New Coke a distraction? Probably not intentionally, but it worked out awfully conveniently. The New Coke disaster is usually told as a failure. But look at the aftermath. Within months of bringing back Classic, Coca-Cola's sales surged past Pepsi for the first time in years. The brand loyalty that the crisis revealed was worth more than any ad campaign could have generated. Coca-Cola had accidentally proven that people didn't just drink Coke, they loved it. And you can't love something until you almost lose it. So let's talk about what these two companies look like today, because the answer is genuinely surprising. PepsiCo generates almost twice the revenue of Coca-Cola, $94 billion versus $48 billion. PepsiCo owns Frito-Lay, Gatorade, Quaker Oats, Tropicana, Mountain Dew, 23 brands worth over $1 billion each. They are a food and beverage conglomerate that happens to sell a cola. The Coca-Cola Company, by contrast, sells drinks. Only drinks. 200 brands across 200 countries, but every single one is a beverage. Sprite, Fanta, Minute Maid, Dasani, Costa Coffee, Powerade. No chips, no oatmeal, no sports bars. They chose focus over diversification, purity over scale, and that decision, the one Coca-Cola made decades ago to stay in beverages while Pepsi built a food empire, is the fundamental difference between these two companies. And Wall Street rewards that purity. Coca-Cola's market cap, $327 billion. PepsiCo's, $211 billion. The company that earns half the revenue is valued 55% higher because Coca-Cola's margins are enormous. They sell syrup to bottlers who do all the heavy lifting. PepsiCo runs chip factories and delivery trucks. Coca-Cola runs a brand. 2.2 billion servings of Coca-Cola products are consumed every single day. That's not a typo. Every single day, more than 2 billion times, someone somewhere on this planet opens a can, pours a glass, or takes a sip of something that Coca-Cola makes. No other consumer product in history has achieved that kind of penetration. And that brings us back to the question from part 1. Who actually won the cola wars? If you measure by revenue, Pepsi. They built a bigger company. If you measure by market value, Coke. Wall Street trusts their model more. If you measure by cultural impact, Coke. It's probably the most recognized word in any language after okay. If you measure by creativity, Pepsi. Nobody else traded soda for warships or merged with a chip company to hack human thirst. If you measure by brand loyalty, the new Coke disaster proved that Coca-Cola inspires something closer to love than any corporation has a right to expect. The truth is, the cola wars never had a winner, and that's what makes them so fascinating. Because the two companies need each other. Without Pepsi pushing from below, Coca-Cola would have become lazy and complacent, the way every monopoly eventually does. Without Coca-Cola setting the standard from above, Pepsi would have had nothing to fight against, nothing to define itself against, nothing to fuel that underdog energy that built the entire company. The rivalry made them both better. It gave us cheaper soda, better marketing, the world's first advertising jingle, blind taste tests backed by neuroscience, and yes, one of the strangest barter deals in Cold War history. Think about where this started. Two pharmacists in two southern towns, 7 years apart, both mixing tonics behind their counters, both trying to cure something, one a stomach ache, the other a morphine addiction. Both lost everything. Both died without profiting from their inventions. And the empires they accidentally created went on to become two of the most valuable brands in human history. Caleb Bradham's drink is now part of a $94 billion food and beverage empire. John Pemberton's drink is consumed 2.2 billion times every single day. Together, they shaped how the world eats, drinks, and thinks about brands. And if there's a lesson in this story, it's this. Sometimes the biggest empires in the world start with the smallest, most personal problems. A pharmacist with a stomachache, a veteran trying to escape pain, a candy magnate who got angry about a syrup discount. None of them set out to change the world, but the world changed anyway. That's the story of Pepsi and Coca-Cola, a rivalry that started with two tonics and a rejection, and turned into one of the defining competitions of modern capitalism. 140 years, and they're still fighting, still innovating, still putting their products 3 feet from each other on every shelf, in every store, in every country on Earth. If you like this video, hit subscribe, because the next story is already in the works. And trust me, it's just as wild.